Welcome to Business as Unusual. This is the live stream where we explore the pressing issues and emerging trends that are shaping the business landscape. We're going to start in just a few minutes, but if you have any questions, please feel free to add them to the chat, and I'll try to get to all of them during today's session. I'm Kathy Steele, and I'm the CEO of Red Caffeine and your host today. And for those of you that are unfamiliar with Red Caffeine, we are a growth consultancy. And that means we build and execute go-to-market plans for ambitious mid-market companies. Our service offering includes a fractional team that is led by a senior level marketing leader and enables a business to scale rapidly without hiring a wide range of full-time staff members. So today we're going to close the year by talking about one of the hottest topics of the year. AI has just taken center stage as a transformative force across all industries. It's been shaping everything from workplace automation and personalized marketing to healthcare and manufacturing innovation. Generative AI tools like ChatGPT and Midjourney have been becoming ubiquitous, driving efficiency and creativity, but they've also been raising critical ethical and regulatory discussions. So as businesses integrate AI into their strategic growth plans, the focus has shifted a lot towards human plus AI collaboration, positioning AI as not just a tool, but a key driver of our future. I'm so excited to introduce my guest and friend, Kristi Zuhlke, who is an amazing female entrepreneur. She is currently consulting on generative AI and how it applies to Fortune 1000 marketing and insights efforts. And she's got a fascinating career that I'm going to let her tell you about. So welcome, Kristi. Can you give a brief history of your career and your new company and share something that's not on your bio?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. So quick bio on me. So I started my career in corporate America. I started at Procter & Gamble, and I had the great opportunity and delight to work on brands like Always, in femcare. I got to work on Gillette and in male grooming, Old Spice, and I was really in the marketing function there. And loved my time there. But I had the itch to go start a company. So I left my CPG world and went to the tech world. And I created my first company, which was a smartphone app that took pictures of moles on your skin and analyzed their characteristics for melanoma. Sold that in 2020. Next tech company, which was a search visualization platform. And then we were acquired last year. And so I have like this obsession of technology and solving problems with tech. And so I have really doubled down on generative AI and getting to know that space. So in what I do now is I've been doing consulting on what's generative AI and how do you use it inside your company. And my clients are everyone from Unilever to a market research company that is 10 people. So it runs the gamut. Everyone's trying to figure this out. And so I'm helping them figure it out. And then also I'm, of course, starting another tech company, because why wouldn't you? So Dott is my little side hustle, which is a smartphone app that helps you curate your memories, and we'll be leaning into some of the generative AI pieces in the future as we develop. So I kind of have two things going on at once. And then what's not in my bio, which is a little out in left field, is that I volunteer regularly in prisons and mentor people on how to start companies. So very much like second chance, believing in second chances and believing in entrepreneurship as a way for individuals to get their feedback underneath them after they're done serving their time, and giving them a reason to have hope and think about becoming the CEO of their own life.
Oh my gosh. am dying to join you. I know you throw it out there when you're going to go and do one of these sessions and you're going to have to hold me to that in 2025. I definitely am so interested. It's just always, it's so compelling to think about giving somebody a second chance. I mean, I think we all have had them, and we want to make sure that, people feel like there's light at the end of the tunnel for their life as well.
Yeah.
So it's just so cool. I love it. So let's jump in. I think, where I want to start this is really talking about, how to define the role in AI and how it's shaping business strategy.
Yeah. So it is a huge role in shaping business strategy, and it comes into play all across an organization, everywhere from operational efficiencies to working it into marketing plans. It's coming into all places. What's interesting is that the adoption of generative AI has been one of the fastest we've ever seen in history. Yet, if you go do a deep dive into companies, you'll hear people say like, "Oh yeah, like I use ChatGPT often," or someone's been like, "Oh, I played with it." But a lot of these companies aren't. They're just kind of at that early phase of adopting it. What I'm seeing a lot is more so their companies are relying on their vendors or their softwares that they use to incorporate generative AI. And so they're less being proactive about it and being more like reactive, like, oh, now there's part of my tool that I've been using. This is a great feature. And so where I try to encourage companies to look is to actually be more proactive in this, because the younger generation is all over this. Like they are using this all the time because they're growing up with it now. And I talk to parents who are like, I have a child in high school, and they're like, this is becoming really hard to manage because you can use ChatGPT to write your paper for you. And if I were in high school and ChatGPT came out, I'd probably find it pretty unmotivating to like want to write anything, because I'd be like, well, that can do it for me, so why do I need to learn? But I think it's to make sure that our companies stay with their competition, and then also for those of us who are like 30 plus to stay with the younger generation, we need to be adopting adopting generative AI into our organization. And so with that, there's an important thing to keep in mind, which is like the technology adoption curve. So within just like any other technology, this curve applies. So what you're going to have is you're naturally going to have folks inside your organization who are the innovators, the first people to be they're probably the people who, even like before ChatGPT was released, they knew about it, they were thinking about it. You might not have any of those in your organization. They're very rare. But they're really important because they're some of the very first testers of this technology. Then what you most likely have inside your company is the 10% of folks who are early adopters. So they're probably the person who drove a Tesla to work today. They have the iPhone 16. They naturally love to play with these things. They're not intimidated by them. They embrace them. And so what we want to make sure what doesn't happen inside it stops with those folks, which is very common right now, because the leaders of organizations are kind of going like, if they're not an early adopter themselves, they tend to be like, okay, well, yeah, check the box. I have folks in my organization using it. So great. We're using it. But really, for your company to be using it, to be like really embracing it, you need to see the adoption across at least through the early majority. You're always going to have the laggards. they're the folks, unfortunately, that are likely going to lose their jobs to Gen AI at some point. They just can't, they struggle to get on board with any kind of new technology. But you need to get AI to be adopted, you really need to create a plan that gets you through the early majority.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. I don't know, not that I'm an expert in this area, but I really feel that unless you're leaving the workforce in the next few years, you have to get on this bus. And you're probably already a little late if you're not really starting to play with these technologies already. So is there, in the clients that you're working with, is it really following this adoption curve? Are you seeing most organizations sort of land in that early majority sector like the curve shows?
I am seeing most of my folks still kind of like they're getting either stuck in early adopters, or I've worked with them to get them through that early majority. It takes quite a bit of effort. Like it's not like, okay, now we've adopted this tool, now we're all on board, or through the early majority. It takes a leader who says, we are going to adopt this and we're going after it. And I think there's just companies all across the spectrum on this, but I would say if I had to say like an average of who I'm working with, they've made it through the early adopters and they're getting kind of like stuck on how to get through to the end, all the way through the early majority.
Yeah, I think, let's kind of switch gears. And I think when we talk about some of the practical applications about how to think about, and when I say AI, I also like kind of say plus just tech enablement, period. I think there's just so much opportunity to be more tech enabled in all of our organizations. So how do companies, start the process? How do they start thinking about the way technology and AI can help enhance those internal processes?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that the key mistake that we make, we like the whole population, is that we often want to force a technology onto something. And what we all know as brand strategists, as innovation companies, as and probably this is Kathy, your employees probably work with clients all the time talking about this. You always start with a job to be done. Like you don't start with the technology, you
Yes.
start with the job to be done. And that's what you're solving for. And then you go, okay, this is the job to be done. What's the right technology to be using to solve that problem? And so what I'm seeing where people kind of get lost is they go like, okay, I'm supposed to be using generative AI. Okay, Kristi, you said I'm supposed to, like, everyone's supposed to be adopting this inside my company, but I don't, is there a tool? What tool should I be using? And instead, I would sit down with your team and go, okay, what's like, what are your jobs to be done inside your organization, operationally or with your clients, or anywhere inside your organization? What are the jobs to be done? And then think through, okay, could with generative AI actually solve this now because we have this? So, for example, like I've heard a lot of folks say like, oh my gosh, every Monday, I have to write 5 posts for social media. That's a task that takes time, that you have to sit and ideate on, that you're like, but here's my strategy. Did I use the right words? Like generative AI, perfect tool for automating this type of routine task. Just like data analysis, like this is something that's a really great, like I've heard a whole data science team was like, okay, they spend hours formatting. They've got a tool, this one company I work with, they have a tool that they have to pass the data from one side to the other, or like from one tool to another tool. And it's very cumbersome for them to clean that data file and then get it into the format that they want. They've created like macros in Excel to try to speed this up a bit. But now that they're actually using generative AI with this, it's like doubled their productivity. Because Gen AI is actually very good at spotting data errors as long as you're prompting it correctly with anything, as long as you're prompting it correctly. But and then also really good at reformatting. So like data analysis is starting to change, and these models are getting better and better and better
Right.
at data analysis. I would say like a year ago, they were okay. Like I could analyze a survey of like, I don't know, 100 respondents and feel pretty confident and get the data to match up. But there might be an error here or there. The models are just getting that much better.
Yeah.
It's just everything from like ideation, graphic generation, across the gamut. There's like so many ways to use generative AI, but I really encourage people to sit down and look at what are the jobs to be done that have to get done, and is there an opportunity to apply generative AI as a solution?
Yeah, and I mean, even kind of looking within the tools that are already in your tool set, your like marketing technology stack, your business
Mhm.
technologies, what is already embedded in those applications that are not really being utilized in your organization? I feel like that that in itself has really fast tracked a lot of you know more utilization, really automating certain things that are super tedious and don't really require humans any longer. So let's talk a little bit more about AI and innovation. So how can leaders really encourage their teams to view AI for, we talk a lot about marketing kind of tool sets and that first, but like using it as kind of a creative tool rather than, a replacement for human innovation, but use it as a companion, like that AI plus human interaction.
Yeah, I feel like that's, a lot of hesitation with using Gen AI is that people are almost like wanting to bury their head in the sand because they're like, it's going to replace me. So like if I don't look at it, it's not there. Like it's going to go away. And the good news is the bad news is it's not going to go away. The good news is that it's actually not going to likely replace you depending on your job. But for the most part, Gen AI is a complement to us and helps us as humans be more efficient. And so one of the biggest pieces of advice that I give people when they're using generative AI is I say, think of it as your intern. So like your intern doesn't know a lot of context about your business. Your intern doesn't know, gives you something, and you would never take what your intern gave you and give it to the president of the company. You would give them feedback. So think of it as an intern. Now it's going to get smarter and smarter. So maybe then it becomes your employee, and then, it gets promoted, but it's your coworker. And so the way that you can use them as a compliment to you is just a couple different ways. It's like in creativity process, like we think of ourselves as super creative humans. We are. It's amazing. But just like use it as an assistant in brainstorming. So for example, like it's so good at coming up with ideas of just off the bat of if you're trying to brainstorm a new flavor for a beverage, it's a great way to just get the thoughts going. So even in just like kicking off a brainstorming session, I've seen clients where they kick it off with generative AI and then they riff off of those that
Yeah.
Gen AI created. I've also seen the opposite of where like they start with themselves and then they give the Gen AI the ideas and say, okay, you riff off of this. And I don't think one way is right or wrong necessarily, but man, it's really cool because it's just like it's a great starting point if you're like having writer's block, or it's a great way to enhance your ideas that you may have never thought of before. And sometimes you do. You're like, I would have already thought of that, and you're like, okay, fine, but it's a double check then. It's also really good at just like even idea ranking. So for example, I was doing an exercise the other day with a group where it was like they had a certain persona of a target that they were going after. And you can feed that to generative AI and say, hey, based on your knowledge of, I'll I'll make something up, but like the dog lover, the pet owner dog lover who has a puppy, what do you think the ranking of this ideas would be? And give me supporting examples or give me supporting data that is reasoning why you'd put it in this order. It's a great way to just kind of like play with it there. Scenario planning, it's like really good at thinking of like all the different scenarios that could happen when you feed it something, because it has such a breadth of data that's fed into it. It can kind of diverge and think about different things that you might not. And then also just like creating AI personas. It's really interesting, especially in like the research world, which is more of my concentration and background, is that you can, the thought right now is that could you create like a persona that is like your target consumer, and then ask it questions and get live feedback. We're calling that like digital twins or synthetic data. Now, I think there's a lot of improvement to do in that space, from if you want to use it as a pure like research, like only query it once and then make some core strategies off of it. But I think there's absolutely, it's a really good way of just kind of doing some gut checking on some ideas, or really using those personas to get feedback and even help you brainstorm.
Yeah, I mean, I have really leaned into it for like sector research, for speaking engagements, just because, I can talk generally about a topic, but if I can get, more of the trends that are going on in that space, without, I don't have, like awareness or, that aptitude in every industry I'm speaking to, but I can make the content so much more resonant to the people that I'm in front of, because I'm, starting to look for market trends. And I'm, and I say it in, my presentations that I am really, using Gen AI to get to some of this data, that there's more, research that would need to be conducted if you were going to actually leverage some of the things that I've served up. But it's close enough. I mean, it gets the party started for sure. So and to your point, like being able to go back and forth and sort of vet and kind of refine things as you're going through the creative process. It's just phenomenal. I also, feel like even some of the, as you said earlier, like visual creations, to be able to use AI to sort of help you concept. I mean, we used to Google everything and just be, Google terms. Oh, I never thought of that image to represent this. And now it's coming up with things that are so outside of the way, we think about a piece of content. And I just love that it's just, providing more inspiration. I don't think it will do the job all the way through, but it certainly is providing that inspiration. And it's so fast. I mean, it's just like, how could you not use it? It speeds the process so much more, and you're able to really give, that deeper thinking part more time, because you sped up some of that initial research.
Yeah. We used to do, when I was at Procter & Gamble, and we still do it now. It's like very common in the research world, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. It's like, you used to do concepting, and then you test it with a group of consumers. And then by the next group of consumers, you'd want to iterate on it. And we would have the design agency there because we'd want them to be able to like mock something up. And sometimes we'd have to like do our focus groups like a week apart, because we'd want to have them draw something up, make it visual. And now you can just like tweak a visual, something visual like that, like within seconds, literally. And you can create a visual for any concept within seconds. It's just pretty amazing.
We use it a lot, like in the early phases of sales research. So I was trying to understand sort of market position and competition. And we used to do that all manually, and it would take numbers of hours to get that completed. I do say, like, this was a few months back, but I did, who are some of the key leaders? And I was researching a company, and it was like John Doe. And I was about to meet that person for lunch and say, I was going to ask, how is it working for John Doe? And then I thought, that maybe I should fact check if that's the right, is that the right CEO's name? And it was not. So, there is still some, issues, and you do really
Yeah.
have to validate the information is correct, but it
Yes.
gets you a lot further faster for sure using generative AI, Gen AI.
Yes. Yep.
So in
Absolutely.
terms of when we start to think about, really that culture change, what are some of the ways that organizations can start to, once they've defined some of the problems that they wanting to solve and, where they want to see some process improvements, what can you do to start to, make sure that it's really getting that ripple effect across your organization?
Yeah, I think it's a lot about like creating visibility, and then also linking it to success. So habits are really, really hard to change for humans. We just very hard to get us to do anything different than what we have been doing. And so you want to find things that create buzz and momentum. And so something I've seen successful inside organizations is like monthly share sessions. So a company I work with, they've got like a monthly this is a very large organization, but they're just their function. In a focus area, there's about 30 of them, and they specialize in a certain area in the company, and they every month they get together to share best practices. Now they've been doing this for years, so this wasn't like share best practices about Gen AI, but now it has become that.
Sure.
So it's like, hey, what did I do this week that really, or this month that changed my life with generative AI. And that really helps those early majority folks see what the early adopters are doing and go, oh, okay, like that's a good use case for it. Because a lot of times, like the early majority just doesn't think about like, oh, I could use Gen AI for that. Whereas the early adopters are the ones that are like, ooh, what could I use Gen AI with? And so they're more likely to use it. And so having monthly share outs is I've seen be pretty effective. I've also seen this is more of like relevant for tech companies, but you could even have like a hackathon, even for like a marketing group, just
Yeah, I hadn't thought about a hackathon in so long. It's
right.
well, yeah. I mean, when we were in the remote world, I don't know that we were doing that, that physical hackathon experience. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think like it's always great to have like a designated half day Friday where you're asking your company to try to hack something. That can be anything, from something truly tech or something like a problem you're trying to solve, and see what people come back with. But it's kind of like a fun way to get people to interact with it and just say like, okay, you guys go off and try to use Gen AI, different tools to solve a certain problem. Um, the most motivating for humans is to add it to like their personalized goals. So for the year. So like really if it's not on your work plan, you're not going to do it. Just because you've got so many other things going on, you just anything you're not being measured for success with is oftentimes like not going to happen. And so I really encourage managers to add something on their employees' work plan to incorporate generative AI. And it's the success of that isn't that it worked really well or that it was like this breakthrough thing. It's more just getting people to play with it.
Mhm.
And like there's no judgment as to like what were the results of that experiment. It's more about, did you use it? Did you try it? Did you find a new vendor that could help you with
Right.
something? So no judgment there. Because otherwise I think people like feel the pressure of like, well, what if I use it wrong or whatever? And that's like a key barrier. And so we want to help them overcome that. And then of course, then there's like the even bigger piece, which is like a company-wide metric. So if you're a CEO, what is it that you're going to do for your company to kind of say like, I want X% of efficiency from some tools. Again, though, I think what happened about a year ago is that It seemed like, I do not know if this happened, but what it seemed like is that Sam Yagan the founder of OpenAI, got into a room with like 100 of the Fortune 500 CEOs and said, Gen AI is going to decrease. You should be decreasing your workforce by 10 to 20%. And then all of them ran back to their desks and said, okay, every function in their company, like, I want to see where you're going to implement Gen AI, and I want to see that you can reduce the headcount or create efficiencies in some way. Now, I made that up. I don't think that really happened, but it felt like that because it was every CEO was saying, how is this going to, like, mandating to their employees, like, you need to I'm going to get 20% efficiencies this year because we have Gen AI now. It's out there. And that's not really I shouldn't say feasible. I guess it could be feasible depending on the company, but what's more realistic is as a CEO of a company to kind of put a challenge out to your organization, less about headcount reduction and more about just like tool adoption, and bringing in testing. Maybe you say, like, I want to see like at least one generative AI tool tested once a year in each function.
Yeah.
Like that.
No, I love it. I honestly, have it planned for our organization across departments. I hadn't really thought about personalized goals, but I love it. I love, we are just a culture of learning anyways. We have to be. We're in a space that is evolving so quickly. So I definitely think, really encouraging people to try tools. I mean, I've tried some tools and they haven't worked well at all for me. So that encouragement of experimentation without expectation of pass fail, like, it's okay that it didn't work. Like, don't sign on for the paid subscription when you've tried the freemium project and it hasn't worked. So let's, think about stopping there. But I do love it being part of, an organization's strategy and metrics for next year. So in terms of, some of the backlash we've heard. So what are some of the risks that organizations are facing when they're trying to embed or adopt these new technologies?
So number one is that hallucinations are a real thing. So hallucination is when the large language model that you're using gives you information that is correct from a sense of, like, it's the probability of that outcome is the highest probability. And so it's a correct output, but it may be wrong. That probably doesn't, I don't know if that makes sense, but here, a large language model, all it is the most sophisticated word probability machine you've ever met. Like, but it's a word probability machine. So it's giving you the most probable sentence based off of the input that you've given it. And so if it doesn't have context, or if it's missing information, or if it's really, really unlikely, the correct answer is really, really unlikely from a mathematical probabilities, from a word probability standpoint, if it's just really rare, it's not going to give you the answer that is actually correct, because it's just the highest probable word is what it's producing for you.
Right.
And so the biggest issue that companies are having is they're like, how do I manage hallucinations? And they're trying to manage the tool. And my approach is actually to manage the user. Meaning, I think the more that people understand how a large language model works, they then understand how to prompt it better. And they also understand when it gives output, why that output could be wrong. And they can think through, like, okay, how do I fact check this? Or how do I make sure that this is correct?
Yeah.
And so a way to overcome this is to make sure that you train your employees on how a large language model works. And so that's like a lot of the trainings that I do, is helping people understand how it works, why it works the way it does. And that then makes them much better users of it, and then also helps them be like just be more critical of it, which I think is a good thing. Like being critical in the sense of like the output.
Yeah, I feel like even the fact that you can get the source of some of the information now, that
Mhm.
to me is infinitely more powerful, and it's a way that you can at least quickly fact check where that source is coming from, because a lot of times you're seeing information that is sourcing something else, or it's not even a really credible source.
Right.
So to be able to quickly fact check the source. So if you don't, if you're not getting sources when you're doing research, you can prompt it to ask for the sources of that data. And then, just being able to validate that, I think has been, to
For
me,
sure.
it's building my confidence in being able to use a tool and quickly be able to assess whether it's fact or fiction.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it'll even give you back a link that is like not even a
Yeah,
valid
yeah,
link.
yeah.
So then you go like, oh, wait a second. And it reminds you that this is not a human. This is a word probability machine.
Mhm.
So you have to know its shortcomings to know its strengths. And
Right.
so I think that's like really important. Another thing that I'm seeing as um, something that organizations are really struggling with, or some pitfalls of it, is that just they are concerned about um, confidential information going into these large language models.
Yes.
And so, where I heard, so a friend of mine works at a very large food and beverage company, and she said to me the other day that they are not allowed to use anything generative AI, nothing, like it's forbidden until IT can get their arms wrapped around it. Well, and she was like, this is, in her opinion, she thought that was ridiculous.
Yes.
And in my opinion, I think that's actually detrimental. I think that is
Absolutely.
huge problem, because all their competitors are using it. So my guess, I don't know, I didn't probe, and I don't even know if she would have known the answer, but there's like this concern of like, how do we, like, if this large language model is like knowing our information, how do we protect ourselves? And so I think it's really important for, again, if you understand how a large language model works, you understand the risk. Um, and also, there are major uh, technology components when you're using an API, when like OpenAI's API or Claude's API, when you're using it, you have the option to not give your data
Right.
to have it train the large language model. And that is absolutely important and acceptable. And that's the way, so there's smart ways to use it. But just saying like, hey, we're not going to use it, I don't think is a smart option. But I understand the tension there, which is like, let's not have it train off of our data. But there's plenty of ways around that. But I think there's just, companies are getting held up on the legalization, or like some of the legal side of things, to but at the detriment of their own success.
Yeah, I feel like I've heard it a bit too in the financial space too, that there's been some, wide sweeping limitations to what can be used inside their
Mm.
organization. So we'll see, how that transitions over the next year, because I think it's a pretty big, deficit. I'm in complete agreement, and not be adopting these technologies you are getting behind already.
Mhm.
So in terms of disclosure, I think that's the other piece. I mean, I think, we're all getting asked, as to how we're using Gen AI. Like, what are you seeing organizations do in terms of disclosing utilization? Where do you see that heading? Because I think it's just going to get more and more critical for businesses to actually have a corporate kind of policy or standard around Gen AI. And
Yeah, so I think there's a couple buckets to this. So there's like, there, I would say the everyone that I'm working with is using generative AI for writing communication, like in their emails,
Mhm.
or and they're not disclosing that. Like they're not like disclosing like, hey, I use Gen AI to help write this email, or even like proposals or big, even like big company-wide communications. They're not disclosing like written by generative AI, because really the ideal use case is that it drafts it for you, no matter what it is, it's drafting for you, and then you're tweaking it. So and so I think, I don't know if this is a very popular opinion, but I don't think you should have to disclose if you're an agency or something and you have to, and you're writing a proposal or writing a final summary of something. I'm not necessarily certain that I convinced that you need to disclose, hey, I used ChatGPT to draft this. As long as you're not feeding that AI model with their company information. I think where the line is crossed is if you're working with a client, or you're doing anything where you're now feeding a large language model confidential information. I think everyone should have the right then to say, like, time out. I need to make sure that you have the right protocol in place to turn on that my data is not being used to train the large language model. And
Okay.
that's where I think the line is. Now, there's so many use cases for Gen AI, so I'm probably not covering all of it. I'm sure there's different kind of ancillary use cases where maybe this doesn't apply, but that's kind of generally how I think about it from the context of what I come from.
And do you feel like you're getting, or in some of the client relationships, are they talking about, making some type of a standard across the organization? Um, is that starting to happen?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. I see. Absolutely. I see. I feel like that was some of the first work that was done when it came out a year or 2 years ago, was like, um, that immediately these companies came out with a SOP on a standard operating procedure on using Gen AI. Like, how can you use it? So a client that I worked with, actually, I was training her team on how to use Gen AI, and she sent me the SOP from the company. And so I made sure that I was training them in the way that was compliant with the
Sure.
organization's wishes. And so I think everyone should have documentation around what is appropriate and how to use it. And how to use it, meaning like, you always have to have if you're using ChatGPT, you always have to have the confidentiality toggle on, kind of thing.
Right.
Or you are not allowed to use any external, like ChatGPT. You can only use the one that we have internally, which is using the API, which we know has the confidentiality toggle on. Like, so I think every organization should have some type of guidelines for folks, to just give them a direction and make sure that there's certain checks in place.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. There'll be more to come on that, I'm sure, as we get into next year. I talked a little bit about, how I've used sort of that, market analysis for market opportunities in some of the speaking engagements I've done. But what other ways are AIs playing a role when we're thinking about looking at market opportunities or innovation trends? Are there any other things that come to mind where AI can play a role in sort of doing that type of work?
Yeah. So, and looking at like market trends, correct? Like, just kind of like
Right.
what's out there. Yeah. So absolutely. So Gen AI is really good at finding patterns. So excited for it in the healthcare sector. Oh my gosh. Like, we'll likely be able to figure out like what causes cancer.
Yeah.
Which is so exciting. I mean, so exciting. And the reason why we're going to be able to do that is because it can recognize these patterns and process data at like a way and speed that we were never able to do with our prior type of AI that we've had. And so that's the same thing for market trends. Like, it will all be able to help us see nuances in market data and in trend data that we just haven't been able to pick up with our own little eyes, and then with even the AI we have in the past. Now, I think these are going to be big companies that create this technology. I don't think this is like hey, there's a way that we can do that, do this with the tools necessarily that you and I have access to on a day-to-day basis. It's going to take a lot of resources, a lot of computing power to create these models that will be able to find these trends that are so nuanced that AI doesn't pick up on. But I do think that is like a core piece of our future, is like being able to pick up on trends before
Yeah,
we otherwise would have seen.
I mean, I do agree. I think even just with, chat GPT and just how much it can synthesize trends within taking a lot of different documents and pulling them together and really consolidating key points. That just blows my mind, because that takes forever to do manually. I just love it.
Yeah.
Anything that saves me time, I'm all for. So
Yeah. Yeah. And we're seeing that a lot in the market research space of like doing even just, I mean, not a huge data set, but 10 qualitative interviews. Like it's able to like, now it's qual. So like, trend, is that a trend? Is it not? But its summarization is so powerful.
yeah, I agree. So as we're kind of thinking about the future on that, kind of that same line of thinking, what are you seeing in terms of the next few years for AI? And is there any markets or industries that you feel are going to be significantly impacted? I know you just mentioned healthcare. What else is should we be thinking about?
Yeah, I do think customer service is going to be wildly impacted. And I think these chatbots are going to actually be able to be much more like a human. Now, I think that's pretty controversial statement, knowing about like the United Healthcare debacle and all that, which I totally understand and am very sympathetic to, and understand there are major pitfalls to the models right now, but they're just getting wildly um, good, frankly, and the avatars that are like, the avatars that can look like a human talking to you, so you don't feel like you're just talking to a chat bot. I do think customer service is going to be a major piece of impact. One thing that's kind of, I don't know, interesting and like, I don't know, maybe controversial as well, is like, I do think like this whole influencer world is going to decrease. I think we're going to see AI influencers and more like non-humans as influencers.
Well, I think it's already kind of showing up in search, and how it enables search. But
Mm.
that is interesting. I hadn't really thought about it. Like, where's Kim Kardashian? What's going to happen?
Yeah, like you could like create your own. You could create your own influencer who doesn't look like you, who doesn't even share your own beliefs and values. Like you could create something totally different. And it's just, and you're starting to see it. There's like a couple Gen AI influencers that have like over 100,000 followers out there.
Oh, okay. That's news to me. I had not known that. That's
Yeah.
pretty cool.
That's kind of interesting as we think about just like, I don't know, what's like your marketing strategy going to be for the future? Do you need to create your own influencer? Are you going to have your own rep? Like, so you even think about like talent, like having to hire a certain persona. You don't even need to hire oh my gosh, like now I can't remember her name, the adorable progressive woman, insurance woman, who's like that personality. She gets paid a bajillion dollars a year to be like their spokesperson. And, but now you wouldn't have to pay a Gen AI like influence or like a talent to do that commercial, because you can't even tell if they're an actress or an actor.
Wow.
So, things like that I think are going to be like, I think that's a big part of our future, is that we're going to see Gen AI agents replace certain human talent from everything from marketing to customer service reps.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think customer service just in itself has progressed so much. I mean, if you think about interfacing with a chat bot a few years ago to even what we're experiencing now, it's just drastically more easier and more intuitive. So I'm all for it, because I do like to use online communication at like 4 in the morning when people aren't always looking. So
Right.
it's definitely beneficial. Neil, thank you so much. I love your comment. We really appreciate. I'm glad it's resonating with you. I agree. I think Kristi, the reason I wanted you to come on, because I felt like when I heard you, you were at our CEO forum and you talked to us a few months ago, it just was so, clear that there is a roadmap, that we all should be really thinking about this in our businesses, or we are going to be falling behind. Nobody wants to be a lagger. We want to always be, investing in our organization and using tools that are going to, enable us to do our jobs faster, easier, better. So I really appreciate that you joining us today. So Parker, if you want to throw up on the screen how, if somebody would like to learn more, get a hold of Kristi, please reach out to her via LinkedIn or email address, and put business as unusual in the subject line so she knows that you're coming from our live stream. I thought this was just incredibly informative. I knew it would be. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And so I also want to thank our sponsors. It's the end of the year. We so appreciate the support that we've gotten from M3 Learning and HR Source. And, they're great contributors to Business as Unusual for many years. And we really appreciate them being a part of our ecosystem. And they bring a lot of great value to the marketplace as well. And so what's happening next? I wanted to say that I have just seen two speakers this year that have just blown my mind. And, the first one was at Women in Manufacturing, and her name is Sam Rappaport, and she's the first female to break into and change the face of the NFL. So I really encourage everyone to Google her because she's just a total badass. She's really the reason why we now see women coaching in professional sports and refereeing games. Her talk at WIM was just so inspiring. But the second one is our January guest. His name is Mark Parrott, and he is an author. And I don't know if he would call himself this, but I believe he's a true disruptor. So Mark is really a top-rated Vistage speaker, and if anybody is a Vistage member, they will know how tough it is to become a top-rated or even a Vistage speaker at all. And he's a financial veteran of the financial services industry, and he's honed his expertise really guiding leaders through complex economic situations. But it's so different than anything I've ever really heard before. His approach and his thinking and how, the data he's rooting his information in is just, it just kind of blew my mind. I have literally had my workbook from my Vistage session on my desk since October when he spoke to our group. So he is going to talk a bit about the book that he wrote, Meta Trends in the Next Economy. He's going to really share some of the, long-term economic forces that really shape our future and how to really think about that in your long-term business strategy. So it's something that I think people will get a lot of value out of. It's really going to make you think differently about data and economics as you're thinking about the next few years of business. And as we wrap up today and Business as Unusual for the season, I really hope today's content is going to put a focus on tech enablement for your organization as you move into 2025, and it really fits into your plan. Thank you again, Kristi, for joining us. I really enjoyed, I can talk to you forever. I really enjoyed having you. But if you have any more questions about, these types of ideas as being a part of your growth strategy, please feel free to reach out to Kristi or any of us at Red Caffeine. We're happy to talk to you about this. And then until next time, let's just continue to challenge the unusual, and we'll see you all in 2020.